Calmness Hour. Turn that nice music down a bit. You'll recognize that again as music from Scheherazade by Rimsky-Korsakov. We're going to be doing another Muslim-themed broadcast in honor of the Ramadan month. This is probably a really important one, so listen closely. I'll say ahead of time, I hope I don't offend any Muslims with what I'm going to tell you today, but it is part of the Islamic mystic tradition, and something you can go investigate for yourself. You can ask your elders, ask them to ask their elders. You can find somebody, a devout Muslim, who will admit the truth of what I'm going to tell you today, or at least most of it, and will be curious to find out more. Okay, we're going to call this one, oh, by the way, this background art is a Van Gogh altered picture of Scheherazade and the Sultan. If you don't know the story of Scheherazade, this is also known as the 1001 Arabian Nights. And Scheherazade was a mythical concubine, if you will, who I guess lived in the time of a mythical Sasanian king of Baghdad, ruler of Baghdad in Iraq, who for some reason decided that he was only going to sleep with any woman one night and then kill her, so he could just keep. I don't know what the reasoning for that was. Maybe we'll see when we do more investigation. But at any rate, she stayed with him over 1,000 nights, 1,001 nights, and he was so impressed with her storytelling and her ability to keep him engaged that he didn't murder her and ended up marrying her, and they lived happily ever after. And the collection of stories then is all these tales that she supposedly told him. Let's find out what the truth of that is. This is a hugely important piece of Islamic heritage. In fact, well, we'll see more as we go. I'm going to call this one Scheherazade and the Lost Messiah of Islam, the happy, sad tale of Haroun Al-Rashid. Okay, so again, who is Haroun Al-Rashid? This is one of the early Abbasid caliphs. Ruled from, let's see, 786 to 809. So this is really, really early Islam. And if you know anything about the caliph, this was the commander of the faithful. This was at least who one group of Islam decided was the heir to Muhammad. Now his actual name we need to cover, because that's important. Abu Ja'far Hārūn ibn Muḥammad al-Mahdī. Interesting. If you know anything about Islamic mysticism, you know that Muslims have their own Messiah tradition. They call their Messiah the Mahdi. Interestingly enough, Haroun was born in Ray, part of Jabal, the Abbasid Caliphate in present-day Tehran province, Iran. He was the son of al-Mahdī, the third Abbasid Caliph. Interesting. And his wife, Al-Khayzuran, a former slave girl from Yemen. Well, that's interesting. That he happens to have this name that later was associated with the Islamic Messiah. Now, what else do we read about him here? He established the legendary library at Bait al-Hikmah, House of Wisdom in Baghdad, present-day in Iraq. And during his Baghdad rule, Baghdad began to flourish as a world center of knowledge, culture, and trade. In fact, his reign ushered in the golden age of Islam. And if you know anything about the history of Islam, during this time, which in much of the rest of the world was sort of late Dark Ages, early and getting into the Middle Ages, Islam was the center of learning. This is where what was left of earlier cultures, the Roman culture, the Greek culture, the culture of Persia, the Hebrew culture, etc., etc., were gathered up and curated and preserved and used to usher in a period of very, very great discovery in science and culture, although it was Islamic culture, and being that part of the Islamic tradition was built on a very strict interpretation of the Torah, they did not allow images. So if you look at the art of this era, it was devoid of people. They drew plants and scenes like that, and maybe even sometimes only geometric designs or something like that, and had this taboo against what we would consider normal art. And this is why if you look at their coinage, you see that their coinage just has inscriptions, generally in Arabic, sometimes in other languages. Interesting to me, because I used to be a collector of ancient coinage, and I never had much interest in Islamic coinage for this reason, because it's, well, kind of like Chinese coinage. It's not very interesting. It just got some characters on it that you can't, it's in a script that you can't read, so it's hard to decode. I always preferred collecting Roman and Greek coins. Got to where I was pretty fluent at reading both of those languages, at least from coins. So, interesting. Now let's take a look at his wife here. Al-Khayzuran, supposedly a former slave girl from Yemen. Al-Khayzuran bint Atta. Now this is an interesting woman because her husband actually died, and she continued to rule in his stead until their son, Haroun Al-Rashid, grew to majority. She wasn't formally a ruler, but she was nevertheless the first woman in history of Islam to rule de facto, and was the first woman in the history of Muslims to have gold coins in her name. She became one of the most powerful women of her time under the name of her husband and sons, al-Mahdi, al-Hadi, and al-Hārūn. During the reign of al-Mahdi, Al-Khayzuran often appeared at court with the Caliph, when the Caliph was present, and also used great political power. And the Caliph sought her views on most matters before issuing orders. Also the first woman to have her own bureaucracy and court, and accept petitions and the audience of officials and the people, and to command and forbid in the caliphate. Independent of the state treasury, she gained enormous wealth by having extensive trade relations with other countries. While al-Mahdi spent most of his time hunting and having fun, she, by influencing the court, was able to hold meetings in her house to run the caliphate. Even after his death, she continued to wield premier power and influence during her son's time. At the time of al-Mahdi's untimely death, she'd taken over affairs and hid his death, and paid the salaries of his army officers. She secured the allegiance of soldiers for her son al-Hadi as the new caliph. Al-Hadi opposed his mother in sharing in partnership, and his own mother killed him after several severe disputes. and brought Haroun Al-Rashid to power. Unlike his brother, Al-Harun did not oppose his mother and officially handed over all power to his mother and relied upon his mother's advice. Interesting. So interesting. Now, how does this all fit into a story of a Messiah? Well, let's go back and review how the Messiah system works. For that, let's go back to my helpful aid of the important souls of creation. Remind you that there are basically two most important male identifying souls, two most important female identifying souls, generally. The male ones are God and Lucifer, father and son. The female are Karma and Lilith. Now, you may think of Lucifer as the devil, but he's actually more of a devil's advocate. He's the tester. He's the one that tries you to see if you're worthy of God's grace. Lilith is really the real demon. And I'm sorry, ladies, if this offends you, but this is truth. And she's not really female. She never has been female. She's always been, I guess you'd call her a hermaphrodite. She doesn't have any sex. She hates the whole idea. She invented it, but she invented the idea of sex as a way of hurting God's team, of thinking she was going to win the battle of creation by creating something that was going to divide her enemies. If you've listened to my talk before, you know that Lilith is the hive mind queen of the Borg. The Borg are a sexless bunch of shape-shifting androids, I guess you'd call them, who are part of a hive mind. And they've been basically trying to destroy the chosen species of the Gaia experiment, which is all around our solar system, and its latest planet, Earth, which is actually the second Gaia planet. The original Gaia was destroyed by Lilith, as she was known then, the dragon Tiamat in Sumerian mythology. Okay, so how does this system work then? Well, in its latest version, which is the game that we've been playing lately, ever since this new Earth was created and the first humanoid species emerged there, lived here. What has to happen for a Messiah to incarnate? Okay, well, originally, the bloodlines that created the Adam and Eve, the first Adam and Eve, were the lines of Lucifer and Lilith. Adam was actually Lucifer, and Lilith was Adam's first wife. That Adam. There have been many Adams. Madam, I'm Adam. In fact, I think it's kind of funny to mention at this point that another little bit of modern culture that will maybe help convince you that this guy's onto something. If you remember back, I don't know, in the 70s or something like that, there was a very, very popular police series called Adam 12. Two partners, the perfect cops, who would go out on their beat, just everyday patrol cops, and kind of like a poor man's dragnet. These weren't the detectives. These were cops doing beat stuff in their car, chasing bad guys, catching them, and then turning them over to, you know, the detectives and stuff like that to gather all that information and stuff. So it was a very popular show, one of the most popular police shows of Hollywood history, probably the best well-known one. Now, why do you suppose it was called Adam 12? When I've been telling you that we're testing the 12th version of karma. And there are 12 levels of consciousness to get to the same level as God. And God has been trying to get back to that level 12 all through day 7 of creation. Another time to mention a show that you probably want to watch again if you find this interesting. Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. It's, well, if you take out the Hollywood crap nonsense, it's telling a story that is true. In the far, far future, English is already the language of choice. It's the chosen language. English is what you might think of as language 12. The perfect language for responsible gods to create and play and deal with each other in a fun and playful way without hopefully offending each other. If you have any sense of humor. And this is one way you can detect the servants of Lilith, because they have absolutely no sense of humor. The servants of Lilith are, in fact, NPCs. They have been taken over by the Borg hive mind. And that's basically the woke cult people right now. They pretend like they're doing the noble thing. They have zero sense of humor, and they attack anybody who questions their day-to-day ideology, which right now is all wrapped up in saving the trans people from supposed persecution. Well, trans people were never persecuted. They aren't persecuted now. What is being attacked is the idea that these folks are actively grooming children, putting on drag shows for children, and teaching young children as young as grade 3 that drag queening is good, that if you have any interest in becoming trans, you can ask for it. In fact, in some states, they have laws, like California, they have laws where you can tell your teacher you want to be transitioned, and they don't have to tell your parents. They will sign you up and pay for it with state funds, and transition your kid, give them puberty blockers, and get them scheduled for a trans surgery without the parents' knowledge. I think maybe they have to have final approval for the surgery, but by then it's like, they go full court press on the parents and say, "Whoa, don't you want the best for your child? Look, they're trans. They need this. And this is a big scam. It's a big scam, just like the big pharma pandemic. This is a money-making scheme for the big pharma industry, and for especially the mental health industry, because these people are being turned into crazies, telling them that, the sex that they were born with is somehow wrong. And the only way that they're going to fix that is by transitioning. And they basically do that to girls who demonstrate any propensity to be tomboys, and boys that have any propensity to be sensitive. If I had been born today, they would have probably turned me into a woman. It's really dark stuff, and it's getting darker by the day, as now it's cool to be trans. You've got biological males saying, oh, I'm trans, I want to participate in women's sports, I want to use the women's bathroom. Stealing sports trophies and stuff, records and so forth from women, unfairly, because the man's body is different than a woman's, more strong. That's why we have separate women's and men's sports. It's not putting women down. It's because if they competed in the same teams, the women would get hurt more than the men. And we don't want to hurt our women. At any rate, how this game works, in order to bring about an incarnation of the Messiah, God, and actually, it's kind of tricky here because God then has to have a son, a spiritual son. So, follow me here. You've got to first have a marriage between a Luciferian line and a Lilithian line that is blessed by karma. Now, how do you know if a Lilithian line is blessed by karma? It has to be all females. Women, don't take offense at this, but all females are descended from Lilith. Because how sex was created was the merging of two very different species. One was what I call the cat people from the Lyra constellation. The other was the dog people from the dog star, Sirius. Kind of describes them pretty well. The Borg are very serious. They don't have any sense of humor, so it's kind of a funny play on words there, as are many things in the chosen language. That's how you know English is it, because there are so many clues planted by folks in the future for us to pick up. That's how they have helped themselves stay on track for the creation that created them. This is how time works. Time is a string. A new string gets set every time there's a saved game of this Gaia experiment. Those saved games get established every time an incarnation of God occurs, and he gets far enough for karma to decide, you know what, this was a pretty good incarnation. We're going to make that a timestamp. Whoever the real Jesus was one of those stamps. There was a time there where it was an attractive time for messiahs to incarnate. Okay, so the Luciferian lines have to come together with Lilithian lines. The Lilithian lines come from the females descended from the Messiah, God. The Luciferian lines come from the descent of God's biological or spiritual children. God doesn't have to be the father to establish a Luciferian line. So when there's an incarnation of God, there's a lot of Luciferian families running around all of a sudden. And actually for 12 generations from this union of a suitable Luciferian and a suitable Lilithian, you have 12 generations for this union to produce an incarnation that attracts God. And then that sets off another 12 generation cycle. If this union doesn't attract God, or if it attracts God and God doesn't wake up, then it's sort of a failed Messiah opportunity, but it does stimulate a lot of souls that might attract a Messiah. And they produce basically one of these golden ages of literature and science. Okay, so this is one of them that was established by al-Mahdī and al-Khayzuran. Okay, following me? Now, al-Mahdī was the Luciferian that happened to hook up with just the right female of the karmic line. Who was this Yemeni slave, you might ask? Well, the name gives away her real identity. Al-Khayzuran, Kaiser, Caesar. Now, it says that there was some problem because they weren't supposed to enslave Muslims, but she was a slave and had been supposedly from Jorash, the modern Bisha, Saudi Arabia. Was kidnapped from her home by a Bedouin who then sold her into a slave market near Mecca. I don't believe this story is true. I believe that this woman was from one of the secret female lines of Karma that was looking for a suitable Lilithian, a suitable Luciferian to begin one of these Messiah periods. Okay? So, Al-Khayzuran was this incarnation of a karmically okay descendant of Lilith. Remember, I said all women are descended from Lilith. They all have a little bit of that archdemoness in them, and anybody who's tried to have a long-term relationship with most women knows that they got a demonic streak in them, and they drive their husbands crazy. At least most of them do. Okay, one that has this karmic line is probably going to be one of the women that has been tempered by karma and is one of the more nurturing and intelligent and good motherly women. Maybe very ambitious, maybe wants a lot for their children. There's nothing wrong with that. As long as you don't take it too far. Mothering can generate really dark messiahs like your Hitlers and Napoleons and Xi Jinpings and Vladimir Putin's and Stalin's and stuff like that. Okay, so let's look a little bit more at this Al-Khayzuran. Where did she happen to come from? What female line did this lady come from? She came from the Caesars, but which Caesars? There you need to tie back into some of the other stuff that I'll reference you to. You might want to go check out a YouTube presentation or book called Caesar's Messiah. And the premise of that, and I agree with that premise, I've studied their scholarship, and I think they've done a good job of it. Their assertion is that basically the character of Jesus was fictional, was invented by Josephus, the Jewish chronicler of the Vespasian's court, who became emperor after he was the conqueror and destroyer of Jerusalem, the destroyer of the Second Temple, in fact. Surprisingly, this Josephus was one of the leaders of the Jewish revolt, who supposedly was among a group that was all set to commit suicide and drew lots to see who would be the last one that killed the last of them and then killed himself. And that happened to be our friend Josephus. Well, he didn't kill himself. He went and got in good with the conqueror and became part of his court, who wrote the history, the official Roman history of the Jewish wars. And in fact, if you look at the scholarship and so forth, you'll discover that the earliest mention of a character that sounds like Jesus is in Josephus. In fact, the earliest versions of the Bible were so keen to make that connection that this history of the Jewish revolt was included as part of the Bible, the New Testament. Now, so maybe I'm offending Christians now a little bit too. Truth is that there were many messiahs in that time, many potential messiahs. And this happened again in this time of al-Mahdī and his descendants, and especially the descendants of Haroun Al-Rashid, who was the son of an incarnation of God, al-Mahdī. This was a Messiah who had a son that of this special marriage to a descendant of Karma. A descendant of Karma that was part of the Caesar's line. I believe that she was part of the same elite group who basically elevated Vespasian to become the emperor. Instead of, if you know anything about that time, the last of the 12 Caesars was Nero. And he was assassinated, basically. And because, I guess, folks didn't like his ways, he was spending a lot of money on entertainments and stuff and thought he was the greatest artist in the world, and you know, wasn't really paying attention to his work, and they decided they wanted a different emperor, or maybe no emperor. I think there were still many people who thought that they might bring back the Republic. So at any rate, after Nero's death, there was a succession of 4 emperors in quick succession. It was the year of 4 emperors, they call it. And the winner ultimately was kind of a surprising candidate, this general Vespasian, who came from very low birth. Was basically, I mean, he was actually made fun of because he was from a family of mule drivers, of basically caravan traders. Interestingly enough, that would have brought his family into contact with many of the more powerful trade families across the Roman world, which by that time included Egypt and Asia Minor and parts of Mesopotamia even. The empire was near its zenith at that time. At any rate, Vespasian is an interesting character that I think was elevated and helped in his elevation by this clan of the East. Maybe he married into it, maybe he was adopted into it, or I don't know how he was pulled into this. Well, you might call it one of the early mafia families, and I bet that they were probably based in Alexandria, which was a center of the mixing of Egyptian, Greek, and Jewish culture. This was the happening city of the time, you know, the time between the Roman conquest of the East and the conquest of Alexander the Great. That's where the great library in Alexandria was established, where all the knowledge was gathered in this earlier golden age. So I think you see a pattern here. There was a Messiah of the Caesars, and it was not the Caesar family. They died out. At least maybe not. Maybe it could have been a hidden descendant of Caesar's child, Caesarion, who was, if you know anything about the time, was Cleopatra's child to Caesar. And there was a time when it was thought he might be used by Antony to basically be a puppet ruler, so Antony could then rule with Cleopatra over the empire, and presumably either Caesar's son, Caesarion, or the children of Mark Antony would descend, and they would basically turn Rome into an Eastern style King of Kings empire. Well, obviously that didn't happen, but there was a faction there in Egypt that still carried on the old oligarchy of Egypt. When the Caesars came in, they didn't kill everybody there. They came and took ownership of Egypt and turned it into a private province of the emperor. Unlike previous provinces that had been added to the empire, they had no provincial ruler like your Pontius Pilate, if you will. There was no intermediary. The Egypt basically was ruled directly by the emperor through freed slaves or even eunuchs. So there was something interesting there. The other thing that's interesting about that story is that if you know anything about Constantine, you will notice that his full name is has Flavianus in it, or at least his father's did. I'll have to double check on that. But he was basically related somehow to the Flavian line, which Vespasian was the emperor that started the Flavian dynasty. It didn't last very long. Only one generation, basically. Vespasian died, handed the empire to Titus, who was his second command in the Jewish wars, and who only lived a short time, reigned I think for about 10 years, and then passed it on to the second son, Domitian, who was another bastard, kind of like Nero, and was assassinated after people got tired of him. And that was the end of that dynasty, but it did save the Roman Empire from collapse, and what could have been another very disastrous civil war. Okay, so where are we going with this? I believe that this woman was not a Yemeni slave. Well, maybe she was, but she was one of these the product of one of these female lines, the karmic lines, the hidden female lines, which, I guess people know that they exist, but they keep them secret. That's why the nobility of Europe has always tracked everything through the male line. The female lines are hidden because they are part of a deeper story that has to do with the Messiah. And a lot of the male lines don't understand that. They think, oh, we're the chosen ones because our parents told us we were so special. And so the Luciferian lines tend to be the mafia families. The karmic lines hide in background and look for suitable candidates for matching up with the karmic chosen ones, if you will. And my suspicion is that this Al-Khayzuran was specifically sent to basically become a favorite of al-Mahdī and hopefully produce a child that would be, basically the Son of God. Kind of like the Christian tradition. Well, long and the short of it is, she did, and this was Haroun Al-Rashid, the caliph who started this tradition of learning and scholarship, and presumably is the one who maybe it was, I think it was probably his mother's idea. Maybe Al-Khayzuran was the real Scheherazade, and she was the one who gave her son the idea of, hey, let's collect all these wonderful stories that are found all around the Islamic world and preserve them, and maybe put a little bit of a more Islamic stamp on them, so that the hardcore followers of Islam don't destroy them, like some of the folks in Afghanistan have been destroying cultural monuments and trying to tear apart the history. That's evil. That's cult Marxism. That's not the work of God. That's the work of the adversary, Lilith, the destroyer, who is also known in Hinduism as Kali, the destroyer. That's not the great goddess. I'm sorry. That's the evil one. Hindus who worship Kali are worshiping the demoness, the worst of the worst Satans there can be. Okay, so where are we going with this? Well, I think this was all history that was kind of subdued and pushed down and became part of the schism which hit the Islamic world. If you know anything about the Shia and the Sunni, you will know that the Shia, who are basically the ones who are in Saudi Arabia and parts nearby, are much more strict than the Sunni, who sort of grew up around Iran, Iraq, where this line of the Abbasid caliphs, in fact, which I think, they were the ones that said, well, I think God should decide who is the descendant of the prophet, the leader of the faithful, rather than, finding somebody in Muhammad's family. Personally, I think that's the better of the two sects. It makes more sense. It's more logical. It's more godly. If you know anything about passing down power from parent to child, if you enforce that for a while, you get children who are pretty shitty. Like the Biden dynasty, for instance. Hunter Biden is what you get when you let generation after generation of entitled people hand down their power to the next generation. Bad stuff. Really weak and stupid children who are given power without earning it, which is part of what I preach, is that is karmic sin. To aid and enable and love children to death, so that turns them into narcissistic, entitled shitheads, that is bad. That's not good. You're not being loving. You are hurting your children by giving them too much love. Tough love is what good parenting is all about. What else do I want to say here for this? At any rate, I think I've given you a taste of what this Messiah game works, and I've shown you some examples of the kind of golden ages that a Messiah incarnation can set off. Even if the Messiah doesn't completely wake up, even if that Messiah is a, bloodthirsty military leader or whatever, that can set off one of these golden ages. And one of those other golden ages produced another Messiah. I'm not sure exactly who he really was, but Shakespeare was one such person. There were actually a number of people at that very same time who sort of were vying for Messiah. Whoever did they aren't really sure who did all the King James Version translation of the Bible into English, but that is the work of somebody who knew what this was all about. The way they translated the Bible and the culture that was created from it resulted in some incredibly inspiring things that told us a lot about what's happening right now. If you know the music of George Frederick Handel, you'll know one of his most famous compositions was an oratorio called The Messiah. And most people know the Messiah chorus, but actually probably the most interesting aria, or whatever, song in that one, if you want to call it that, is "The trumpet shall sound. The trumpet shall sound, and the dead shall be raised incorruptible." Think about that. Because that English translation gave us a whole new meaning of incorruptible. And I'm not sure that meaning came through in the original Greek or Aramaic versions, or I think the Coptic versions, the Nag Hammadi versions of the Bible. I'm not sure if that incorruptible translated that way, but it really has a new meaning right now in an age of corruption, really deep corruption. A lot of anti-messiahs running around that are thoroughly corrupt. Folks like Xi Jinping, Vladimir Putin, Joe Biden. To be honest, I think Donald Trump is kind of corrupt. I think he's a false messiah. Happens to have a name that makes people think, oh, this is the last trumpet. This is the Trump. Well, it's kind of funny because my last name is Trump. The Dutch version, and the French name, my mother is French actually, the French name for Trump is trompette, because it comes from the musical instrument. So my children, female children, are going to be trompettes. And I like to think that the last trompette is going to be the finish of this fun game, this cycle we're going through, this, well, you may not see it as a golden age. It's actually the end of a golden age and maybe the start of a dark age. That's kind of how things work. Sometimes a Messiah ushers in golden age, sometimes it's a dark age. I think if you look at what happened after Constantine, things continued to go downhill. His family fought and quarreled. Of his 4 sons, one of them basically killed, the mother of 3 of them killed the first son from his first wife, and then the sons of the second wife basically killed each other until there was only one left. And then the one that was left didn't have any offspring, had to pass the torch to one of his nephews, reluctantly, the Emperor Julian, which is interesting. They call him Julian the Apostate because he tried to bring back the pagan worship. And he was very, very enthused about the cult of the bull, the Apis bull, Serapis, who was, if you know anything about the end of the Great Library of Alexandria, go watch the movie Agora. They make it all about this woman philosopher, Hypatia, who was a real person, but and did get persecuted by Christians. There's truth to that, but the deeper story there is that they really wanted to destroy the Serapeum, not the Great Library, the Serapeum, which actually was one of two libraries. The Great Library of Alexandria had become more or less kind of a tourist attraction at that point, and most of the scholarship and most of the more esoteric works were being preserved in the Serapeum by this cult of the Serapis bull, which I'm telling you is what remains of the real Christian story, the story of rebirth of a Messiah in a succession of chosen species, of which humanity is only the last. At any rate, I'm not going to go any further there, just throw out a couple of tidbits to maybe entice you to dig into some of my other content. Like, share, subscribe. Help out in any way if you like this content, if you want to be involved in helping to publish my next book. I'm working on that right now. At any rate, thanks for tuning in, and come back again for the Omnist Hour with Rob Trump. Happy Karma.